and welcome everybody to this workshop on staffing and employing a support worker. So we've had quite a lot of demand for this workshop, and there may be some more people joining us shortly. So look, I'm Lisa Martin. I'm the president of the Federation of Disability Information Centres, and I'm also the director of Complex Care Group. And I'm sure most of you are aware that these workshops are part of what's called Pathfinder Facilitation. And we have a contract with Whaikaha for the delivery of Pathfinder Facilitation, a sort of a walk alongside guidance for disabled people and their families to envisage and implement their best life. And these workshops are my responsibility to bring together. So today we are talking about staffing. We are recording, so we ask that you keep your microphone silenced during this workshop, unless, of course, you have a question. So as per usual, what we will be doing is emailing you in the next day or two, and we will send you a link to the recording, which will be uploaded on the Federation's YouTube channel. So we'll send you a link to that and any other relevant sort of material from today's workshop, as well as a link to the Pathfinder Facebook page. So look, thank you for joining us. We're doing things a little bit differently today. We're kind of doing this as a panel style workshop. So I will be asking questions of our two panelists, who are Bron Foxx from Disability Resource Centre Whakatane, and Cherie Cawdron, who is a mum and also works in the disability sector. So we're aiming for two different perspectives here: the perspective of a provider around employing staff, and the perspective of a parent who's using individualised funding and employing their own staff. So that is what we are aiming for. And I think we will, I'm wondering if perhaps I'll ask Bronwyn and Cherie to just briefly sort of introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. Bron.
Good afternoon. I was going to say good morning, but I'm a bit behind. My name is Bron Foxx, and thank you, Lisa, for the introduction. I've been the Chief Executive of the Disabilities Resource Centre for 26 years. So I think I might be called a relic in the sector. I have a significant disability myself. I have a hearing impairment. So I am very clear about the place that I speak from as somebody with a disability, but also that I'm very passionate about the clients that we serve and that we're here to serve. So I'm hoping to give you the view of that might be slightly left of field from normal provider speak. So I apologise in advance that I might offend some other providers, and I don't really care, because I'll just tell you what I really think and hopefully tell you what it's like in provider land. So thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks, Bron. Cherie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. I'm Cherie. Thank you for letting Bron go first, because I could finish my cough lolly. That was great. I'm a mum of a 20-year-old young man who's got complex disabilities, and we've been using individualised funding for about 10 years, I think it is now. And normally I run a team of about 5 people, because he's pretty much 24/7 care. I've used agencies in the past as well, you know, depending on what was going on. I'm board chair for Complex Care Group, and I work at Disability Connect in Auckland as well. So I'm really looking forward to your questions today. Thank you. And that my son will be featuring as a cameo every now and again.
That's wonderful. Okay, thank you, Cherie and Bron, for introducing yourselves. So, look, we will get started on this workshop. We've got some pre-prepared questions, and we're aiming to cover a wide range of topics related to the staffing issue. But naturally, you might have questions of your own. So what we're sort of aiming for here is I'm going to ask the questions. Bron and Cherie will have an opportunity to respond. And then if there's questions from the audience here, we can pause. And while you're speaking, because we do want to ensure your anonymity, while you're speaking, we can stop the recording temporarily. Okay. All right. Well, look, if we're all ready, I think we will get started. And we're going to kick off by talking about staff recruitment and the most effective ways to advertise for staff. Can you both give your opinions on this topic of advertising and the best ways to recruit staff? Feel free to mention any sort of recruitment platforms such as Seek or Trade Me Jobs or MyCare, eEmploy and so forth. And also if you could possibly speak a little bit about how do you draft your advertisements, your sort of wording? What are the key things to include in an advertisement and the importance of a job description? That's a pretty big loaded question there. But let's get the ball rolling. Who would like to start there? Bron, can I ask you to start?
Certainly. So we advertise and recruit across a number of mediums. We have regular ads on Seek. And so it's probably appropriate just to talk about Seek for a minute. It is really important that you put in the criteria questions that people need to answer to move through to the next one. In particular, whether people have got working rights to work in New Zealand. So let me give you a little example. We have a current support worker ad up for the Western Bay of Plenty. It has had 1,000 applicants and 950 of them are not in New Zealand. So a complete waste of time. So if you're going to do something like Seek, make sure that, and to be really honest, they need to be able to work in New Zealand. I'm not being disparaging of people who can't speak English, but it is really important that you actually get that they have some basic level of understanding English, because otherwise it's really difficult. We have had better hits on Seek when we put the salary range in and we make it visible. To be really honest, the thing that brings us the most support workers is Facebook. And in each area there seems to be job pages. So there's a Whakatane jobs, there's a Tauranga jobs, and we have run ads in that. In the beginning, our ads, when I started, they were really formal, and it kind of puts people off because we thought we were being really professional. And the truth is, people aren't interested. They want to understand what the job is. And in health and disability, we're a bit jargony. Even when we're dealing with our own, we're quite jargony. So for me, the key thing is get your language at the right level. The other thing that I've noticed in the very recent history, the last 2 months, people are writing exceptional letters to go with their exceptional resume, and they are written by ChatGPT. So my next suggestion is don't ever do interviews on Zoom or Teams. You need to be in the room with people, because it's really easy for people to contrive an answer when they are remote. And you need the body language and all of that other stuff. I don't want to go on too much, Lisa, because I don't want to cut across Cherie. But again, a job description is absolutely vital, and you should send them that when they apply. so they actually walk into an interview knowing what the job is. There we go. That's my bit.
Great. That's great. Thanks, Bron. Cherie, would you like to comment?
Yep. So just building on what Bron said, we have used Seek as a independent employer as well. The disadvantage with Seek is, as Bronwyn said, the number of applicants, and also, of course, it's $200 and something per ad. So you have to factor whether that you can afford that in your individualised funding. My best success has been, while my son's been at school, is to recruit the teacher aides at his school. I'm sure you guys have all heard this before. We spend a lot of time in hospital, so we've also recruited casuals from the hospital that have worked with us as nurses over time that have gone on maternity leave, people that we've kept in touch with. Probably the most extreme example we've had is my husband recruited a girl from the supermarket because she was always so lovely when she was serving it, that he said, "Oh, why are you working here? Do you want to do a different sort of job?" And it did come to fruition. She was a good caregiver. So sometimes it's, I'm going to have a little bit, Holly, we're going to go to school tomorrow. Okay. Sorry, guys. Unfortunately, I don't have a support worker yet today, but they are coming. Oh, it's hard to think when you've got a young man hanging on you like a little monkey. Sorry, guys. The other thing I've used is, I'm based in Auckland, is Flying Kites, who do recruitment. Again, that comes with fees, so you have to be probably recruiting full-time, I'd say, for doing that. And the free, cheapest one for using, obviously, is Student Job Search. Yeah, Mitchell, later. We're going to go later. Go and get your shoes on. So Student Job Search is free, and also you do, I don't know, it's been very hit and miss for us. Sometimes that's worked, sometimes it's not. I'm very specific because my son has kind of medical needs to ask for that sort of thing in the job advertisement, that I'd rather have a student of some sort of health occupation or an interest in disability. As far as job descriptions go, as with Bronwyn, one of the things with that is that the job description forms your basis if you have any problems later on, as far as performance. So it's important to get your job description right. There are lots of templates, and I think Bron's going to share one, and I can share mine as well at the end of the session. I'm just going to try and find something to amuse my boy, and I'll be back in 2 seconds.
Thanks, Cherie. We completely understand. That's the great realism of these workshops, that we have presenters who have, real and lived experience of disability. So no problem there at all, Cherie. Thank you. Yes, so as Cherie touched upon there, we are going to share some documents courtesy of Bronwyn Foxx. So we will share some links to those perhaps in the chat box, and we'll certainly include those in the email that we send out in the next couple of days and follow up to this workshop. Okay, well, look, we'll move on to the next question there, and it's around the skills and attributes when selecting a support worker. We've all sort of heard of that issue of personality versus teachable skills. Do you sort of put the emphasis on the personality of the person, or the skills that they're already coming to the role with, qualifications and so forth? And what sort of things do you discuss with an applicant in the actual interview? And also, sort of a step further to that, when training staff, when perhaps you've selected your staff member and you're wanting to train them, what sort of training do you use, and how is that cost met? Bronwyn, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. I feel that in interviews, there are 2 things. One, there is the responses you get in an interview, and the other half of that is your gut. And I think we underestimate sometimes our gut reaction to people. And I think to be really honest, in the caring profession, it's sometimes what an applicant might not say, or an unrelated question that shows you whether they have the kind of attitude you want. I mean, it's really easy to roll off being caring, empathetic, and all of that. But to be really honest, for support workers, they need some grit. They need tenacity. They need the ability to respond, because the truth is they're in somebody's house. They have a door open to somebody's personal life. So I think questions have to be framed about how that works. So a couple of really odd questions that we use is about what people do with their tea towels. One, where you keep them, and two, how you wash them. Because that gives you a really clear indication of whether somebody understands cultural competencies of not washing tea towels with towels or other clothes. It also is, if you run a household, if somebody moved my coffee or my tea towels, I'd be pretty uptight. So it's also that whole ordinary living stuff. We do a lot of questions around scenarios, and scenarios that are based on real life incidents we have had. For example, there's a relationship issue with the client and the support worker. There's a relationship issue between the mum of the client and the support worker. There's some external influences. So we do a range of scenario questions, which really are designed to get people to tell us how they would report an issue and how they might deal with an issue. Because what you really want is somebody to be open and honest, even when things don't go right. Because inevitably they don't go right. So what you want is somebody who's going to tell you the story, not hide it. So from that point of view, but I say to my team who are interviewing, your gut reaction is also very important. And I think we kind of have moved into a world where that's taken away a bit. When we talk about training, we talk about there not being an option. People need to participate in training. I'm very lucky that we as an organisation fund it. So we put people through their qualification training. I have a training coordinator who manages that. I personally am a national assessor. So at the moment, I have 35 students that I am assessing their quals, and some of those are individualised funding support workers. So they're doing their career force qualification and I'm marking their work. So I absolutely love that, because it gives me an opportunity to know that people are out there getting their quals and getting supported and doing some amazing stuff. So for me, that's a real bonus that's my side hobby. Sad really, but that's my side hobby. And I really believe that training will change our universe. The more people we train and people understand this is a profession, actually the state of our care will change. And that's what we've got to be focused on. We're lucky we can afford to fund it, but we don't do level 4 because I don't believe we've got the in-house skills to do that. I think that needs to be, and we support another provider to do that. We used to get funding from Tapo. Now that sounds like it might not be an option, but I think that and I don't know how Cherie does it, so I'm interested to hear how she talks about training, but We walk in the door with a support worker knowing they've got to attend training. They've got to attend 6 trainings a year that are not qualification linked. And they're paid to attend those. But it could be anything from case note writing, incident reporting, learning about dementia, learning about complex disability, you name it. Love it. And if we had people here in the Eastern Bay or Western Bay that were having individualised funding, we would welcome them to come free of charge to our training. You've got to make the most of every opportunity you can get, and some free training is always good. And I would challenge other providers to do the same, because one more person in the room is not going to have any impact. Sorry, Cherie, I went on a bit long.
That's right. I was just hoping my young man didn't turn back up while I was to get an opportunity. For me, one of the most important attributes, and it's because of the fact that my boy has autism, is reliability. So as a quality, reliability and loyalty are really big on my personal hit list. How do you find that out in an interview? Really, really, really challenging. I guess the only part of that is if you do a reference check, you can you can't say how many sick leave days has somebody had, but you can say, did this person turn up on time? Were they able to pick up extra shifts at short notice and things like that? Because to me, that makes a difference if somebody's willing to be flexible if somebody else is sick and that sort of thing. Because I think for most families, when you're employing in the home, you might only have 1 or 2 support workers. In our case, we have got 5, but even if you've only got 1, you kind of need a backup. Otherwise, it's mum or dad, obviously, as the backup. I would rather recruit on personality, definitely. Personality, I have a challenge of personality I think that will work with my son, and the personality of the person I think will work well with me. I know my son is the priority, but sometimes somebody he likes really gets up my nose, and that's the only way I can put it. So it's my solution for that sort of case is that I use that person when I'm not actually in the house, because if I know that my son likes them and he's happy with them, but maybe something they do just they're in my space, then I don't find that really difficult. As far as in an interview, I normally try and find out what other commitments people have got in their life without being too disparaging about what people do outside. I've had a lot of, from experience, people that say they'll work on a weekend, then it turns out that they do want to go to church on Sunday, or they do play a certain sport or something on that day. And even though they've said they'll work on the weekend, they actually really don't want to. So if weekends are part of your thing, I think it's really important to, I phrase it, if you could pick your hours, which hours would you like to do? If we had 20 hours for you, which are the days that work the best? Because I think it's got to work for both of you. It's got to work for them and it's got to work for you. So there's no point signing someone up to do Saturdays and then 6 weeks down the track, they say, oh, I really don't want to do Saturday because I've got something that I normally do. And I have made that mistake before. As far as training goes, yeah, budget for training when you're using individualised funding. I'm just going to say it's probably a joke for most people. It's usually the parent providing the training. What I would suggest is using your disability information advisory centres for any trainings that they have on, like with Explore behaviour support, or if the school runs anything with speech therapy or anything like that, try and get involved in that kind of training, or getting your support workers doing that. I have just an induction sheet for when somebody starts. So what I know that I want them to be able to do before I'll leave them alone, because it takes me a long time to trust somebody. So it might be that they're learning a few things in their first week. And in my case, I double a person with somebody else. That's how they train, or they double with me. And I have been lucky enough to be able to afford that, because usually there's enough cancelled shifts that I can pay out of that. It's one of those things. This year is the first time I've used the Career Force training, which is without the TPO funding, is $2,000 for level 4. So it's quite expensive. I took that up because I had a big budget of respite money that I was not able to use after the government changed their funding, and I paid all my workers' personal cares out of the respite money, because I can pay support workers, and use the personal care money as for the training, because I knew I was not going to be able to use the respite. I just realised this is recorded, so that's probably not a good thing to be saying on a recorded interview, but there you go. I think it's about being creative. That way I was able to offer my staff that I have not put a lot of emphasis on the level 3 and level 4 qualifications, because I felt they were substandard for a long time. I have changed a little bit. We have finally got some information in there about EGL and disability, but it's a big commitment for the parent as well, because I have to be the assessor, or not the assessor, the verifier of the things that they're doing. So there is a bit of work for a parent to do that. Just for me, I come from a background, I'm worked in travel and education, so I'm used to NZQA system, and I have assessment and moderation experience, so it's not frightening to me, but I could understand for some people that would be, you know, quite a big deal to want to do that. I think that's about it. I'm going to cough.
Thank you. Thanks, Cherie, and thank you, Bron. It's fantastic to get your perspectives here on these questions. So what I've done is I've put in the chat box there a letter that's gone out far and wide throughout the disability sector, so it's no big secret. It's a letter there from TPO, and TPO is an organisation who, as I'm sure most of us will know, TPO have some funding grants which some parents and organisations use to train staff. So they have a variety. TPO does a lot of work around mental health and addictions, as well as disability, and sort of pathways to employment and so forth. So check out the TPO website. They've still got a lot of trainings happening, but they have sent out this letter about some restrictions around they've had a cutback from whaikaha funding, meaning that they will in turn need to cut back on some of their training funding grants. So anyway, check out that letter there. I realised after the first question I didn't pause to see if there was any sort of questions from the audience there. But now that we've had 2 questions answered from our panellists, I'll put it out there if there's any questions from our attendees today. To the next question that we have for our 2 panellists there. Question number 3. What are the benefits and the drawbacks of the different categories of employment? Casual, part-time, full-time, or contractors? And do you think it's beneficial to share staff with other service providers or other users of individualised funding? And what are the benefits of being an employer versus using a provider organisation or agency staff? So, Bron, shall I hand over to you to get started on that one?
No problem. I think provider or individualised funder, either choice is fabulous, which again might be heresy for providers, but I think it's actually entirely down to a family and what works for them. And I think that's the fundamental choice bit. I think, and I'm giving you the view of a provider, so just that what I believe with a provider is we will manage the payroll, the invoicing, the police checking, and all of that. So that's the really good part. The bad part is the exact same issues you have under IF about reliability, staffing, and all of those are exactly identical between IF and a provider. So it's much of a muchness, if I'm honest. We have looked extensively at part-time employees, contracting, casual, and the reality for us, we can't prove they were anything but part-time permanents for us as an organisation because they have a reasonably regular schedule. So it's difficult to argue. So in my organisation of 200 support workers, I have one casual. And that's because it's based on the leave that's taken for a particular family. And this person only comes on board to do that 1 or 2 weeks, and it's never at the same time in the year. So that's how we could get away with them being casual. We are in provider land, we are sharing staff now. Because we've been so short, some of the packages of care we can't manage alone. Now, that works really well, except for getting paid. The systems in the government cannot really cope with more than one provider for one client. So there's lots of dramas about invoicing, but we will still continue to do it. So if you go down the provider route, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if there's more than one provider, because I think we all do bring different things to the table. It's a bit like when you're choosing a provider, you should interview us. Like, are we going to be the right people for you? Because we might not be. We might actually not be a good choice. And we should be kind of grown up enough to say, well, this is what we offer and this is how we work. Particularly when you're talking about complex or large packages of care. I wouldn't be, if I was making decisions about providers, I would want to know what we can do and how we do it. That's just me personally, but I do think that's really important. Like I said, we've had a couple of instances where we've been the backup. When we've been backup for people who've had individualised funding or they've had other family support and just been able to provide emergency cover for people. That's not a generalised practice though. So bottom line, it's the choice that's right for you and your family. The end. I could lobby and say I want 100 new clients, but actually, if we're not the right place, then that's not the right answer. There you go.
Right. That's fantastic. Thanks, Bron and Cherie.
Sorry, we'll just build on that. So maybe just going back to saying, what are the benefits of using a provider versus doing it yourself? Obviously, if you are the employer, you have to deal with the things you might not want to have to deal with. If there's a problem or the person's not working out, it's a lot easier to go to your provider and say, such and such is not fitting in with our family. And they may be able to move them in with another family that is actually is a good fit, for example. We started out with providers in the early days before IF. We had terrible experiences. That was because we just didn't get continuity of people. So that if continuity of the same people, so you're not having to train, retrain, train, retrain, then that is an advantage of employing yourself. We've been lucky enough to have people stay with us 10 years, one 13 years, another 8 years. So over time, those people are more like family. And that can be a real bonus for the IF system, whereas we just never got that through a provider. But again, we're in Auckland. Maybe it's a different scenario too in different regions where you have different, depends on your requirements out of that person. Casual, part-time, full-time, that's a really big one. I used to try and employ some people as casuals because of the variation. In hours, but sorry, hang on. But I have now gone to only taking on either part-time or full-time. Full-time can be like 30 hours plus. It doesn't have to be 40 hours if you have that amount of hours. And just because I find that I get more loyalty out of that person, I think once they sort of feel like they're, it's more of a full-time job, and I'm not competing with them, perhaps going for other hours somewhere else. My young man wants to go to school, but he will get up at 12:30, which is too late. Go with Holly, please. Benefits of being an employer. I really don't feel like there's many. You got me on a really bad day. So we just had a funding cut. So benefits of being an employer today, I'm actually going to have to probably reduce some people's hours. So I'm not really feeling the love. I've been given this job by the government to do the employing when we don't get paid to do it. I think when individualised funding came in, it was sold to us as a really good opportunity for disabled people to recruit themselves. And I think for disabled people that wanted that control, that was a really good thing. But I think for families, it's just pushed the workload onto the family and made you have to understand employment agreements. What's the difference between part-time, casual, full-time, and leave and everything. So it's a lot of work to understand all of that. So if that's not your bag, if that's not something you want to learn about, then I would go with a provider. It's really, as Bronwyn said, it's really up to you what's going to work for your family, because it's a lot of work also being the employer. You do also have the risk of something, if you have a personal grievance or something. We've been lucky, but you know, that's a reality. Those things can happen where somebody does want to do a personal grievance. So you've got to think about the risks involved as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Cherie, and thanks, Bron. But look, again, what I'll do is open it up to the audience now if there's any questions on that particular topic, Carol. Okay, what factors do you need to consider when setting the pay rates for staff? How do you factor in PAYE, or that's pay as you earn, tax, KiwiSaver, annual leave, and travel? There we go. Shall I hand over to you, Bron?
Sorry, team. I was on mute. The bottom line is you need to do some sums. So the reality is, if you're doing an annual leave calculation, you need to be putting aside 8%. And there's a whole range of things. I would be breaking it down by the money you get and put in everything. So you should be able to, if I was doing it realistically, I would be going through that list, and you can go on to the IRD website and work out somebody's PAYE. You can find out the Kiwi Saver rates of what you would need to pay. You need to factor in annual leave, sick leave, bereavement leave. So we use a calculation of 8% for annual leave and 2% for sick and bereavement. And that needs to be dealt with every week. And what you need to do is get it all on a piece of paper. And so in between travel, the simplest way to think about that is if it's just a single person that they're going to, if they live further than 15 kilometres away from you, the support worker, you need to pay IBT. So you'll get that information off the Whaikaha website. And Cherie will tell us, hopefully, that I believe IF clients now are entitled to IBT. I don't know. There might be some issue with that. To be really honest, you also need to factor in training costs and training time. And I know this is going to sound a bit dumb in an IF situation, but I would be factoring in some time for meetings, even if you don't have them, so that you're really upfront with what the complete costings are before you get to the bottom line of what you pay people. You've got to make sure you have covered off all of your bases so you aren't shortchanging yourself on hours and time because you haven't factored stuff away. So that's how I would be doing it. Of course, with a provider, it's far more restricted for us at the moment because we don't set pay rates. They are provided to us by government, so we have no choice. So that is all about to change because we're about to enter pay equity 2, which means that there will be no set rates, is what we know so far, which is not great, to be really honest. So there you go, Cherie.
Okay, so I have a unique approach to my situation. I just pretty much everyone in the team is paid the level 4 rate or slightly higher, and I work on it's 20 to 25% is the cost of the extra things that come from that. So apart from the hourly rate, I know that I'm comfortable that if I pay somebody up to $30, I'm still, the cost of that is the 37. If I'm going to pay somebody over that amount, then I'm going to be having to reduce the hours that I've got. So for years, what I used to do is get the total budget, chuck it in a spreadsheet, work out what I had for hours each week, but my weeks are never the same. If you've got something like respite or something like that, I just knew that I had to average X amount each week. So I would just try and month by month make sure I wasn't going over that budget. I've found that I think there's only one year, well, there's been 2 years where I came up short by a fortnight. But the rest of the time I've managed to utilize the money down to the last, pretty much the last cent. One thing I will say is most of the IF that we've had has gone on support worker wages. If you do want to use it for purchasing incontinence products, but if you don't get enough or other things, then you're going to have to take that off your budget and then work out how many hours you've got. So if you're going to claim the $300 recognition payment, if you want to pay for training, or anything like that. The other thing is I've always had to factor in is that sometimes we do have people work on the public holidays. I used to work on public holidays, so I needed somebody to work on public holidays, which is why I've always gone with the 25% loading instead of the normal 20% people say is the difference between the rate and what the government is giving you. I do have contractors as well. So for a contractor, you're not paying sick leave, annual leave, or anything like that. So if you do take a contractor on, you can go up to that $37 if you wanted to, without affecting your hours. And that's entirely whether the person is comfortable with that and you're comfortable with that. I know that hosts will normally kind of question you about why you're doing a contract, but right throughout the time we've had IF, I have used contractors as well as employees. If you're paying yourself as an IF, then you probably are a contractor. And in some ways it makes sense, because how are you going to get annual leave anyway? Because basically if you're sick or you go on holiday, you know, if you're paying yourself, you mightn't have a person that's going to step in for you. KiwiSaver, I always do that. You've got a choice of like paying it on top of, and I always do that I think that's fair for the employees. And if someone is a contractor, I'll normally help them to understand how to do their tax return. Or I have done this in the past. I've invited IRD to our house. They came and they explained it. And I actually got a nice person who did that, like who came from IRD. So I think, you know, if you don't understand it, you can utilize a free service to get someone to help if they want to become a contractor. As far as mileage goes, in between travel doesn't really exist for individualized funding, but you can claim mileage under respite. So in our case, we use the IRD rate if somebody takes our boy out in the car to somewhere and pay that way. You have to be careful, obviously, because that can quickly escalate into quite a lot of money. So if you are going to be paying mileage out of your IF rather than out of a supported living payment, because they're a child, not an adult, then you have to factor that into your budget. So you really need to, when you're negotiating with your NASC, actually think of those things, because when they talk about personal cares, they don't talk about the fact that you want to be in community, and it's about getting out of the house as well. And under the new IF, there is the flexible funding. There is mileage allowed for self-regulation. So like my boy wants to be in the car all the time. So every day he goes for a drive with the carer. So I have to allow for that in the budget to be able to pay for that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you both for your feedback there. We're getting some really golden gems, actually. That's the benefit of these workshops, of course, and as speakers, and yeah, really enjoying running it as a panel, actually. There's a question in the chat box, so maybe Carol will switch off the recording. Carol, we've just resumed recording. How do you build good relationships with staff, setting boundaries, standards of behaviour, and dealing with disputes? And I know this is a huge topic, so really interested to hear your responses. Bron, do you want to start the ball rolling?
Just before she does, sorry, Joe wants a question.
Oh, we've got a question.
Hold on,
I think Joe's got a question.
I'll just put on.
So we're moving back onto the next question now. How do you build good relationships with staff, setting boundaries, standards of behaviour, and dealing with disputes? I know that's a big topic, but Cherie, do you want to start?
Yeah, I feel good and bad about this one. because I would like to have better boundaries than I do. So, I find it really hard having somebody in the home because our care is almost 24/7. So there has to be some boundaries about what they're doing in the house while you're there and around the other members of the household. And my best piece of advice would be to get it right from the start. For one thing for us is we do have a mobile phone policy. I don't want somebody sitting on their phone the whole time when they're supposed to be engaging with my son, even if he is perhaps on his phone doing that. It doesn't give them free license to do the same thing. So yes, you can use your phone, but not necessarily like when he's asleep. That's fine if there's no other jobs to be done. We're in a mum and dad here. What we've found that's worked for us is that usually one of us will have a better relationship with the caregiver. Like for some reason we gel with one better than the other. So if there is an issue like on timeliness or something that's getting done wrong, I will sometimes just say to my husband, I can't deal with it today. It's your turn. And I think being able to recognize your own limits is really important, because I've got to admit I've had some doozy arguments through the years. So I'm far from perfect, because it's your home and it's bloody hard to actually have to be an employer in your own home. With dealing with disputes, as I say, we've been pretty lucky. Had a couple of minor ones. Well, I'm going to say they're minor. Maybe the employee thought they were more major, but we're just like over hours, and I have had two staff members leave on really not such good terms. One that just stopped turning up, and I had no sort of callback, and it's pretty soul destroying when you're not really feeling, how did it get to that stage? I don't know. I think sometimes it's just about having to step back and not let it go along. If something's wrong, not to let it go on for a long, long time, because the longer you leave it, it's just going to build up. I know Bron's got some good ideas on setting boundaries, so I'm going to leave her to standards of behaviour, leave her to deal with that. But I think, I don't know, I'm going to use an example from a friend that one thing that has come up, like as your child gets older, is if you're going out and they take your child for lunch or something, but let them eat something that you don't want them to eat or something like that. I think you have to be very specific about what it is okay, because you might be making a choice based on a health issue. Like my son can only have liquid water, but school will give him a smoothie, for example. So you've actually got to have something in place that says these are the things you can and can't do with him, because it also can blow your budget if somebody decides, oh, we'll go to a movie.
Hello.
I'll stop. Oh, sorry. Okay. Over to Bron.
Hi, team. Apologies about that. That was just somebody knocking on my door. Okay, so I'm going to be the tough old bird about this, and I think that actually you need to set really, really clear boundaries at the beginning. One of the documents that's coming up that will be available is what we call the standards of behaviour. It is a 3-page document that we use, that we get people to sign when they start being employed. And it has every conceivable terrible thing that could potentially happen. And that document has been built up over the 35 years we've been delivering services. So it talks about inappropriate relationships, talks about timekeeping, it talks about a whole lot of stuff. And I think you make your life easier if you're very clear, particularly, and I'm going to include myself like Cherie has, I've learned to be better around conflict but I've spent a lot of years being scared about it. Because they're hard conversations to have about when things don't go right. So Cherie was bang on the money. The moment something happens, don't avoid it. You just make it worse. You are far better to get around the table and talk about what you want and what you don't want. But this standards of behaviour document has been incredibly successful for us, including when there's a dispute. Because you can go back and say, on the 31st of July, you signed a standards of behaviour saying this is what you would do. What you have done is outside of that. So I just want to remind you about that document and actually what the rules are. I think it is so much harder, and in some respects, it's probably my personal opinion about IF, is that it must be bloody tough being the employer in your house and having people coming in and out. Now, I think I think you are amazing as parents to do that, because I think there must be very few spaces in your house that are yours. But that's the other thing I would ask you to think about. Is there spaces in your house where you don't want support workers to go? Like your bedroom, for an example. Do you know what I mean? Like, is there a place where actually is yours, entirely yours, nobody else's, people can't come in? Because I think you need to be clear about that. And no matter what, no matter how skilled you are, some people are dicks. And they're going to be dicks, and they're not going to make things any better for you. And sometimes they just need to go. You know what I mean? Like, the reality is they are not conducive to doing what you want, how you want it. So deal with it sooner rather than later. And again, look at your employment agreements. Look at how you're going to handle when things go bad. The cleaner and clearer that is, and whatever you do, I'm going to give you 2 phrases. Whatever you do, put it in writing. So if you have a meeting with somebody and you're actually saying they've been outside their standards of behaviour, then follow whatever you've said in writing. If you're wanting to meet somebody and ask them some questions, the best piece of advice that I tell my staff is, before the meeting starts, you say that the conversation is without prejudice, which means in effect you are having a very open conversation, and actually the employee can't use what comes up in that information against you. Fair process means you ask questions. I'm going to give you a really hideous example. For example, about 18 years ago, I had a support worker who was having sex with clients. So I had to ask a range of questions, which I was completely intimidated about. But I worked for 3 hours to write the questions, and in effect, I read everything I needed in the meeting. Because no matter how hard-nosed we sound we are, we're all chicken. we're all a bit scared. So having a script was incredibly helpful for me because I could say what I wanted to say, and I felt like it was a bit of an out of the body experience, if that makes sense, because I had a script and I could say, what did you do? How did you do it? So sometimes you got to have tips and tricks that just make it easy when you know it's tough. And the other thing is you're really allowed to have support. It's okay for you to have support as well as the support worker have support. So even if it's a mate in the room who sits there and says nothing, but keeps poking you on the leg so you know that they're there, sometimes that's incredibly helpful. And, you know, we don't always get it right. But I think start out tough, have your standards of behaviour, be really clear about what you expect, and then keep people coming back to it. But again, Cherie's right. It's bloody awful conversations and hard, and you get suckered in by people because they're lovely, and then it goes pear-shaped. So sometimes it's great, and sometimes you always have people who are magnificent, and they're magnificent all the way through. And then you have people that aren't. That's the human nature of the service and employing people. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant, people. Sorry, my apology.
No, that's good. That's good, Bron. It really is. And that's and this is why we call it human services, isn't it? Because it's a very human experience to either be receiving support or providing support or be, sort of overseeing the provision of that support. So human services is what it is. All right, well, look, we are coming to the end of the workshop. I know we've run a little bit over time, but the topics are just so fantastic. So look, that brings us to the end of the workshop. Keep an eye out for that follow-up email, and we will be in touch again soon. I do want to extend a very warm thank you to Bron Foxx from DRC Whakatane and Cherie Cawdron, our parent representative who uses individualised funding. Thank you for your participation, your wonderful answers on this workshop today, and thank you to everybody who's joined us. So we will bring the workshop to a close. Thank you. Bye-bye.